Greetings, loves. It is I, Tactical Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. Today, I want to talk about why guns aren't for everybody. That's not to say that I think that there should be restrictions placed on firearms or that firearms should be hard to acquire, and especially not that they should be managed by the state to restrict items from certain individuals from owning them. I do think that owning a firearm is a very personal choice, and when you make a personal choice, you should make a very informed choice, and there are a number of factors that you need to consider. Some people simply just are better off not owning firearms, and I know that might be a little bit controversial to some people, but no, not everybody out there should be owning guns. It's actually actively a bad idea for a lot of people to own firearms. And again, this is not to say that I think that we should have an official capacity of managing who and who doesn't get access to firearms necessarily, but there are just some real important things to consider when you are choosing whether or not to arm yourself. So I'm going to go into my thoughts on this subject, my ideas, my things that I want to convey to you for you to consider as a potential firearm owner. And so without further ado, let's get into it. Now, the first thing to consider when you are potentially buying a firearm or choosing to arm yourself is your budget. That is just a factor in the world. If you are acquiring firearms through means of currency, then you probably have some limit and some constraint on your budget. So it's really important to be realistic. It's really important to consider the fact that you actually may not be able to properly afford to arm yourself with something like a firearm. Now, there's other options out there. I will get into that later, but budget really dictates pretty much everything that we do in this world for the most part. And firearms are absolutely not an exception to this. Guns are expensive. They are very prohibitively expensive, and you need to understand that, and you need to come to terms with it. And you really need to decide before you start spending money whether or not this is right for you. The idea also that any gun is better than no gun is simply not true. You can choose to take the budget route, and there are good budget options on the market, and it's getting better and better every day. But I just have to say that there are certain things that just are not appropriate for what you are preparing for. If you are specifically trying to carry and be more defensively minded, then yeah, probably you want a reliable firearm. You want something that is easy to use, that is safe for you to carry, that won't necessarily put you in jeopardy when you need to count on that piece of hardware most. So yes, there's a lot to consider there. And there is a certain threshold where the budget simply just won't cut it. So make sure that you are spending enough money to properly arm yourself, not just say that you're armed for the sake of being armed, because sometimes it can actually end up hurting you, especially if you have some sort of faulty firearm that just won't work and you pull it out in a defensive situation and it doesn't go bang. It may actually have a malfunction that could even hurt you. So definitely understand that there is some bare minimum here to your budget, and you got to be realistic about it. I also need to add that the gun is not the only constraint in your budget, and in fact, the accessories often can outweigh the cost of the gun. I see this mistake with a lot of new shooters. They set a budget for their first gun or their second gun or whatever, but regardless, they don't really set aside money for the other things that they're going to need to actually use the gun in the first place. First of all, for training, you're not going to just buy a gun, you're going to buy ammo to train with, and ammo is not cheap. That stuff adds up very quickly, and you very quickly outshoot the price of your gun. Beyond ammo, you also need to get targets, you need to get a shot timer, you need to get accessories like eye pro, ear pro, holsters, spare magazines, a belt, pouches, medical equipment, etc. All those things are the bare minimum for responsible firearm ownership, in my opinion. If you aren't training with your firearm regularly and you don't have the equipment to do it with, then you're actually just going to become a liability, and it's going to be completely half-assed, and you're not actually doing yourself any favors. You might as well just not own a gun at that point because you failed to actually budget for it. So be realistic with your budget. Understand that it's okay if you can't afford things. People can't always afford everything out there, and you need to prioritize things in your life. Sometimes owning a gun is simply just not going to be the most important thing in your life, and that's okay. Just be realistic about it. Another thing you need to budget for is time. Shooting is a very perishable skill, and it takes a ton of time for you to be competent at handling firearms. That is just how it is. If you aren't regularly dry firing, maybe at least once a week, then you probably are going to notice a huge decline in your skills when it comes to shooting. That is just how it is. You need to put in the time. Not only do you need to skill up to become competent, but you need to keep those skills sharp through regular training, because you're going to become a liability at some point because you won't handle your firearm safely if you aren't familiar enough with it. And especially if you are trying to potentially prepare for a self-defense scenario, then obviously you need to be on the bleeding edge of everything that you can manage. Obviously, don't dedicate your entire life to training unless that is really generally what you want to do, but within reason, you got to make sure that you have a minimum threshold of expectations for yourself in your training. You need to set goals. You need to work to actually advance your goals further and further as you skill up, and just do the best you can with what you got. And that includes resources like time. If you get a gun and you throw it in a closet and you only take it to the range maybe twice a year, then that might be acceptable for a very casual hobbyist. But if you are defensively oriented with your firearm ownership and usage and skills, then you might as well not own a firearm at all at that point, because you're just going to become a liability. There is a certain level where you are just plain and simple a liability, instead of somebody who is capable and actually competent at potentially using a firearm in a defensive scenario. So keep all that in mind. Make sure that you can realistically set up a training regimen for yourself and regularly partake in that regimen so that you do not become such a liability to yourself and those that you care about. Another very important consideration, and one that doesn't really get talked about enough in my opinion, is mental health. If you struggle with mental health issues, if you are ever suicidal, if you ever feel that there is the smallest chance that you, as a result of these issues, might take a firearm and turn it on yourself to end your life, then you should not own a firearm. Absolutely should not. There is no reason to own something that puts your life more at risk, that you're investing money and time into, if it potentially endangers your life. That is just not really worth it. And yes, there are extremes and there are also gray areas in this, and we all struggle with mental health issues. We live in a hellscape. I don't think anyone's not traumatized to a certain extent or another. And yeah, a lot of people do struggle with suicidal ideation, but when it becomes so real that you actually start considering suicide and that you start really thinking about harming yourself and you start exploring options, well, I hate to say it, but if you have a firearm at hand, it's probably not a good idea to keep it at hand. You're probably safer without a firearm than with one. If you are arming yourself for self-defense and you potentially put yourself at more risk by owning a firearm to yourself, then you gotta be really honest and upfront about that. You owe it to yourself, and you need to keep yourself safe, and it defeats the entire purpose. So make sure that you are very realistic about your mental health, your capacity to own a firearm safely for your own sake. Another really important consideration is home safety, and namely the people that you live with. Just because you're a responsible firearm owner, you've got the resources, the time, the ability to invest in this, and you are trusting yourself to be safe with firearms, and you're not worried about yourself owning firearms, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's still right for you in the context of where you live. If you live with other people who have suicidal ideation and mental health issues and may ever use that firearm against themselves, then that's a huge problem. Furthermore, you might also have kids. Kids are very curious. Kids absolutely take people's firearms and try to use them when they're not looking. And there's a ton of cases in this country every year where a child uses a firearm and hurts somebody, often themselves, and that is just not responsible. You need to consider all the factors of your home, the people that you live with, and their well-being as well as a firearm owner. Now, there's a lot of measures you can take. There are storage measures, there's locks, there's ways to disable your firearms so that they are not easy to use if somebody were to just grab one on a whim and potentially harm themselves or someone else with them. Take those measures, be very serious about that, but furthermore, understand that even if you do take those measures, it's still not always right. Be respectful and considerate about the people that you live with and their well-being as a firearm owner. Now, if you're running down this list and you're thinking, oh no, maybe firearms aren't for me, maybe I really can't do myself justice by owning a firearm, that's perfectly okay, because even if you are defensively oriented, I got good news for you. guns almost never actually help you out in most self-defense scenarios. The statistical probability of you actually being justified in using a firearm and being able to use a firearm effectively in a self-defense scenario is extremely unlikely out of all the self-defense scenarios out there. In fact, most self-defense scenarios warrant some sort of less than lethal means, and personally, ethically, I would like to not have to shoot people if I can help it. If I am in a defense scenario and I'm cornered and I can't do anything else about it, first thing I'm going to reach for is probably my pepper spray. Pepper spray, particularly, is really good. I carry it every single day. I don't carry a gun without pepper spray, and it's far more accessible, it's cheaper, it's legal in pretty much everywhere in the US at least, and it requires a lot less training. People absolutely should be using means like that as a basis of their self-defense plan, because that is probably the most likely implement that you're going to reach for. And further, you should also be investing time and resources into training martial arts. You often in self-defense scenarios aren't going to be able to actually reach for an implement. You may be taken by surprise, or you're just in a situation where all you have is your body. So being able to defend yourself with your body effectively is extremely important. And with all these things in mind, if you are actually serious about your self-defense, you're going to start with these means. Having a gun and nothing else is just a fantasy. You're not actually prepared for anything. So make sure that you are actually considering all of your options here and prioritizing the ones that you're most likely to use. So in conclusion, it's actually okay to not own firearms, and it's okay to accept the fact that they're not for everybody. Again, I think that personally, people should have easy access to firearms and they should not be that restricted. And I think that this is a personal thing for people to decide for themselves, but as a result, that responsibility is on you. You need to be honest and realistic with yourself, and you owe it to yourself. Life is too short. You got to spend it wisely. Maybe guns aren't right for you for any given reason. That's okay. Move on. If you are worried about the safety of your friends, your family, your loved ones, your community, you can contribute to that in a number of ways that don't involve owning firearms. That's absolutely just how it is. It's a multifaceted approach when it comes to defense of anybody in the first place, but the safety of those people, there's a lot more that goes into that. There's economic safety, there's medical, there's mental health resources. There's all sorts of things out there that need to go into providing your community, your loved ones, your family, everybody around you that you care about the safety that they need. And so don't necessarily just think that firearms are going to fix everything. In fact, they just tend to break things. So there's a lot more to life than this. That's what I'm saying. So take a holistic approach to where you put your resources in your life, how you make your decisions, understand how it affects yourself and the people around you. Well, I know most things that I talk about on this channel are me sharing my skills, my thoughts around training, and reviews, and my experience with gear, and this video is not nearly as flashy or interesting as any of those videos. It is pretty heavy, and it's also one of the most important things I could possibly talk about, if not the most important thing, when it comes to firearm ownership. So if you got people in your life who are looking into getting a firearm for the first time, please pass this along to them. Please talk to them about this. And if you have further thoughts on this matter, I'd love to hear more about it. This is a community thing, so let's have the community chime in the comments below. So don't be shy. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it insightful or helpful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell too. And as always, thank you to all my supporters on Patreon. I could not do any of this without you. I work a day job just to pay the bills, and I have a Patreon to basically just help me break even with the time and resources that I pour into this channel. I don't run ads on this channel. I don't run this channel to generate a profit. I do it because I'm passionate about this stuff and I want to talk about it and share it with you. So anything you can help out with is greatly appreciated. If you want to go help out, you can always go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. The biggest contributors are named at the end of the video. And that's all I got for you today. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. Please be good to yourselves. And as always, please take care. Bye!